Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we are diving into an exciting tool called KinD, which stands for Kubernetes in Docker. It's a fantastic way to run your own Kubernetes clusters right on your personal computer or laptop. Whether you are on Windows, Linux, or a MacBook, you can deploy and access KinD in all the environments. So let's start our session. To start with, the question is, what is KinD? KinD allows us to create Kubernetes clusters using Docker containers as node. And that's why it is very lightweight and very quick to deploy. It is perfect for testing, learning, or developing Kubernetes applications without needing any cloud services or any third party tool. Think of it as your personal Kubernetes playground. So before we start with KinD, we need to make sure that we have Docker installed in our system. So I have run this command docker -" version, and it is giving me the kind of Docker as well as the version it is installed in my MacBook. If it is not installed in your system, just go to Docker GitHub document and follow the procedure to install Docker in your system. And this is very much required because KinD uses Docker to create the clusters in your system. And now for installing KinD, normally for any environment, whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux, you have to go to KinD GitHub page. So in Google, you will type KinD GitHub and you go to this page, and you need to follow the commands for Windows. At this point, what we are looking for, this curl command and the whole extension, you have to copy this full command extension into your PowerShell, or you can actually use Chocolate, which is the package management software of Windows, and the command is choco install KinD in your Windows system, and it will take care of the whole the installation part. If the environment path needs to be set up after it, you need to set this up and move kind.exe, which has been downloaded using choco install command, to an appropriate folder from where you want to deploy and configure your Kubernetes environment. Yes. Then you will open a PowerShell window and type KIND command, KIND, to check if it is installed correctly. Unfortunately, as I do not have Windows system with me, I am not able to show you. But for MacBook environment, of course, I will not give you this kind of theoretical explanation. I'll rather go ahead and install the KIND tool with the MacBook package installer Brew. Yeah, Brew install KIND. When I run this, it will actually install KIND in my system, and Homebrew will take care of all the steps. I do not need to go ahead and run multiple number of commands. And once it is done, we can actually run KIND command to verify the installation, as well as the available subcommands, which we can actually run one after another and see what it does. Yeah. So now creating a cluster, that is our main requirement, correct? So it is pretty much simple. So what I have to do is I need to run this command, KIND create cluster. Yeah. So when I run this command, it will create a cluster with this by default name. The name is KIND. Yeah. So it will create a cluster with the name KIND. Why KIND? Because it is a by default naming convention which it takes. If you want to give any other name, so you have to give another extension which is --name equal to whatever name you want, your expected name. Yeah. And now if you want to see what has been created after running this previous command, you can run this next command, which is kubectl cluster info, which will give you the details about the Kubernetes control plane and code DNS, which has been created as a part of the previous KIND cluster. I'll clear the screen. And then I can also run this command kubectl get nodes. Yeah. So yeah, this is the one. So what happened? The previous command, kind create cluster, what it has done, this command actually created a default single node Kubernetes cluster with the name kind, and we have seen how it happened. So at this point of time, if you want to create another cluster, let's say with the name cluster one, you can actually run this command, and the cluster one Kubernetes cluster, which is also one node cluster, will be getting created for you. And this is how you basically create a cluster with your defined name. Yes. Now, it will follow the same steps which you have seen earlier. But right at this point, the reason I am actually recording this video for you just to show that previously, any kind of Kubernetes environment, whenever we tried to deploy in our environment, we used Docker desktop, correct? And now we are trying with, and also many other tools. But now even you have Minikube and so on and so forth. But right now, when we are working with kind, we want to make sure that we want to create multi-node cluster for our requirement, correct? So what we'll do is, at this point of time, we want to simulate a little more complex environment. So let's create a multi-node cluster. And for creating the multi-node cluster, we need one config.yaml file, which I have kept it here. So when you see this config.yaml, okay, it has got normalized Kubernetes manifest, but the important part is here, nodes. Yeah. So this configuration will set up a cluster with one control plane node and two worker nodes. And at this point, what I'll do is I'll actually go ahead and create this 3-node cluster by running this command, kind create cluster -config equal to config.yaml. What it will do? Will it create the cluster? No. Why? Because, as I said, if you want to create a cluster for the first time, you have the option to not give the name --name flag. But as the by default name kind has already been exhausted, you have to provide the name, yeah, flag. So I will give the name as multi-node cluster, yeah. And then right at this moment, my multi-node cluster or 3-node cluster will be getting created. So this particular configuration, as I said earlier, it will create a 3-node cluster with one control plane and two worker nodes. And when my cluster will get ready, we can go ahead and explore the internal config of our environment, of our 3-node cluster, basically. So if you see, the various components of your clusters are getting created, installing CNI control plane, configuration nodes. These all are just like before, what was there. But if you see here, the installing storage class, and specifically for joining worker nodes was taking more time, because this option was not here, because it was only 1-node cluster, but it is 3-node cluster. Right at this moment, if I go ahead and see kubectl get nodes, I will see that this is the cluster which has been which has got created for us with one control plane and two worker nodes. And maybe I'm not sure whether you have noticed it or not. The more number of cluster I'm creating, it is actually changing the context along with it. So previously, when I have created the second cluster, it has shown me, when I have run kubectl get node, it has shown me one node, previous one node of that previous cluster which has got created. But when I have created this multi-node cluster, at the same time, when the cluster got created, the context also got changed. What is context? Just Google it. I'm not talking about it at this point of time. Yeah. Now, let's deploy an Nginx server application. on this particular 3-node cluster. Yeah, so I will actually run a command called kubectl create deployment. Let's say I'll give the name as nginx only, --image equal to nginx. What it does, this will create a deployment name nginx using the nginx image from Docker Hub. I could have given any other name like nginx then some version, okay, which would have fetched the nginx image of that version from Docker Hub, but I choose to go for the latest one. And when it is latest, I do not give any name, any other extension after it. So now, to access this nginx from outside the cluster, we need to expose it. Yeah. So what I'll do is I will actually run kubectl expose then I believe, yeah, deployment nginx -port. I'll give the port number as 80, and then of course the type as node port. So now once I run this particular command, our nginx will be accessible through a node port. But the problem is, if I want to access this particular nginx service via node port, I need to do a number of different steps to access, yeah, via node port, which is kind of, number one, time consuming, and I really want to avoid at this point of time. So I will take a shortcut. So I will basically do a port forward utility or port forwarding for that particular part, so that I can access the nginx service in a lesser time, you can say, in a shortcut way. Yeah, so service nginx, and I will be giving the input and output ports. And now the port forwarding is started. So from, you can say, your containers 8080 port to my local host, this particular laptop's 80 port. Yeah. And if I go now here, and if I go to localhost colon 8080, basically, I will see that it has been started. So it's basically from the container, from our local host 8080, it is actually redirecting, or it is actually trying to contact with your container 80 port. So now if I actually look at, so this command basically forwards the port 8080 on your local machine to port 80 on the nginx service. Yeah. So now at this point we can access nginx at http localhost 8080. Yeah. So now, are we done with our cluster and want to delete it? I mean, obviously that's all basically we wanted to do, correct? Because there are many other things, of course, but today's session is not for all the other advanced things. We'll get to know later point. So now, if we want to go ahead and simply, delete the cluster, before deleting, I haven't shown you one thing: kind get clusters. So when I type it, I can see 3 different clusters which has been created, yeah, by kind. So these are the 3 clusters. So now if I go ahead and run this command, kind delete cluster, it will create the by default cluster. But after that, if you want to delete it, you have to give -- name. Yeah. So let's say I give the cluster 1, and this cluster 1 will be deleted. And see, it is getting deleted pretty fast because my system is pretty empty. I mean, it is not getting used that much. Plus, as we know that it is not the real-time nodes or hardwares which are actually getting involved. These are the normal containers basically, yeah, which are actually acting as a nodes. So that's why it is pretty fast. But for you guys who are using Windows system, it may be little laggy, yeah, because Windows takes time. Now, so what we have understood with the last command is, if we have multiple clusters, okay, and you have, of course, you have provided different names for those clusters. So you need to specify which one or which particular cluster to delete by adding -- name and then your cluster name. This is one thing which please do not forget, even while creating the cluster and then deleting the cluster also. Yeah. Now, a few fun facts about KinD. Yeah. So first of all, KinD lets you run not just one, but multiple Kubernetes clusters at the same time on your computer. So it's like having your own Kubernetes playground as such. You can even customize these clusters, mix and match versions, or even try out different network setups with CNI plugins. Yeah. Ever you have built any Docker image and wanted to test it straight away? So with KinD, you can load your Docker images directly into your cluster. So you do not need any Docker registry as of, yeah. And if you are working on web apps, setting up an ingress controller is a kind of breeze. So it is perfect for testing your routes locally. And also KinD supports persistent volumes too. So testing stateful apps is no problem. And for like the kind of adventurous guys, there's even IPv6 support. Plus, accessing node file systems for a deep dive into your clusters workings is a super easy kind of stuff. And one more thing is KinD is also just not for playing around. It is also a powerhouse for your CI/CD pipeline, making testing in clean environments pretty simple. So when I'm talking about CI/CD, basically we are also talking about certain modern CI/CD tools like GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and basically that's it. Yeah. So you have just learned how to set up and manage your own Kubernetes clusters with KinD, and also a few cool facts about it. So experiment with different configurations, deploy applications, and explore Kubernetes. Yeah. On the same way, it's a powerful tool for learning and development. Always one side note, I could have used load balancer as a type for instead of this node port. Yeah, but let's keep it for some other day. Why we will be using load balancer, why not node port, or vice versa, that also we can discuss some other day. Now you can perform everything inside these Kubernetes clusters which you are creating. So whether it could be doing log and observability management by deploying ELK or EFK stack, or Kubernetes native Prometheus, Loki, Grafana stack, or maybe performing package management using Helm-chart or Kustomize, or implementing GitOps using Argo CD or Flux CD, or implementing service mesh features using Istio or Linkerd, or maybe other advanced Kubernetes ecosystem tools like Kyverno, Trevi, Teleport, or Vault, Spacelift, or Atlantis, etc., etc. But as mentioned just a few seconds back, those will be the subjects for some other days. Yeah. So till then, until we meet again, keep exploring. Yeah. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.